icebreaker questions, of course, to reveal more information about myself or about towards the others, so like that I can form trust and have a pleasant experience with each other. Part two of this study was basically where we focus on the content. So in this condition, compared to the other one, we had a large screen where they basically had the icebreaker question visible, and the small images, like if you give, for example, on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you have this, that you see your presentation view, and on the side you see the other participants in your call. This is the study 2, and in study 1 they had like without the presentation view, so basically large images of themselves, or on with them or without them. The results of these studies are basically are quite interesting to say. For highly social anxious individuals, we see that experienced higher levels of self-awareness once the camera they saw themselves, and once they saw themselves, it was basically like the usages of pronouns pointing to others. So like they basically try to point away from them and say, oh, let's focus on you rather than on me. And the interesting aspect was high levels of experienced anxiety, which is when the camera was switched off, to say, oh, they started to ruminate because they were like not sure if they can see themselves, or like how do they look. So the camera, basically the camera feed, was giving them the safety and say, oh, I know how I look and I know how I represent myself. And the interesting aspect was, we saw these results only in study 1. In study 2, where the content was in focus, we couldn't see any difference between high and low social anxious individuals, which means basically that we see, okay, the design of my interface can affect the comfort and, of course, the attention of my users, and say, oh, if I want to make it more pleasant, or like more accessible for individuals with high levels of social anxiety, maybe I want to say, okay, you want to have the camera on, but also give them, for example, something they can rely on. For example, give them the task highlights in comparison to, oh, you only see yourself, for example, all the time. The interesting aspect of the easier of use of technology is always coming, of course, with a price. And of course, the big questions or the big challenges we are facing is the role of privacy and ethical usage of data. The interesting aspect here is, for example, when you use digital platforms like Zoom or something, there's, of course, always the risk of like you're exposing yourself, and there's the question of exploitation of your video feed. So, for example, in prior work, people tried to use the videos of Zoom calls to identify and reveal the personal information of individuals. And in combination with social media data, they were able to find basically reveal gender, age, and degrees and stuff like that. So it is an interesting question, like how do you balance these kinds of things and how do you apply these technologies? Because, of course, on one side, you have the benefits of saying, oh, this is an easy accessible tool. But then on the other side, you have the question, of course, who is hosting this tool and what is happening with the data? And of course, we all have this problem with the NDA, with the legal aspect. So we just skim through and it's like, okay, we just accept and move forward. But the question is, what is happening with the data? What is happening with the video stream, which is recorded or happening during your sessions? For example, if you say, is it confidential in which digital space I'm sitting right now? Or is it possible that somebody else can exploit my video stream? And this is something which is quite challenging, of course, because on one side of the question is like the informed consent and education. Like you have right now, if you go on online, for example, you have the whole questions around accepting cookies, for example, where you have this big text wall and say, oh, this is what we're using them for, and you have to scroll down. It's like, oh, I'm rejecting that. And in video calls, for example, depending which platform you're using, you maybe just agreed. I think there was a big controversy around Zoom in 2020. What happens to their data? So is this data safe, or can it easily be breached? And there was, for example, the big trend that protected calls were basically breached by random people going in and causing big drama, and so not posted non-safe for work content and stuff like that. So like breaching these kinds of confidential and safe environments is something which is quite challenging. And of course, taking one step back from these kinds of drastic experiences, on the other side, we have, of course, the risk of the question, how do I give informed consent and how can I educate myself about the technology? Like, I know my background is computer science. Like, I know how, or I'm familiar how most of these technologies work. But somebody who has no technological background, it can be quite intimidating to learn how to use technologies and what are the effects and what are the implications of these kinds of use technologies for them. And this is something which is quite challenging and a big debate, how to design accessible educational resources about technology and make it easier and better to and help people to make informed consent about the usage of technology. And this basically is like when computer science and mental health and legal challenges are overlapping and saying, okay, how can we design this that you can ensure that people understand what they are signing up for? The second part, of course, is the protection of data confidentiality. So I talked before about this. How can you ensure that the data you're recording and your video calls and these kind of things are actually protected? And right now, this it relies a little bit on you as a mental health expert, or like the user overall, to say, are these platforms safe to use, or is this something where somebody is basically exploiting that? So it is right now, building off what I've mentioned previously, it's quite a challenging aspect to say, okay, how to make sure that it's a safe stuff, so it's a safe platform. And of course, the big topic is there's like, are my data encrypted? Who has end-to-end encryption of my communications, for example, which is an interesting aspect which you can look up, for example, to your chat applications and chat apps. Like WhatsApp, for example, is encrypting it to an end-to-end way, which means that only the individuals who are in the chat can decrypt this and basically can access the informations. Now, on other platforms like Telegram, for example, these kinds of end-to-end decryptions don't exist. This means that a third party could basically look into that and exploit your conversations. So it is important for you, if you decide to use platforms, to look closely into how are the data protected, how is the communication secured, and how are the data stored, so that especially like with mental health, of course, people are revealing very private and very sensitive data to you in these conversations, and how can you make them safe for them? And this leads to another third aspect, of course, the liability of the experts. Now, as I mentioned before, right now it's basically good luck out there and and find the best platform for you. But the question, of course, is the liability of experts. Like, who is in charge if, for example, a data breach is happening? Is it your fault because you use the platform, or is it the liability of the platform to say, oh, I got hacked and therefore the data was stolen? And in 2019 or 2021, I'm not sure right now, for example, you have these kinds of data and security breaches, for example, in Germany, where basically hospitals were attacked by hackers and they stole health records and stuff like that. And who's liable now for the damage caused by that? Is it the individual? Is it the hospital? But how can they be liable if they have no technical expertise? And on one side, of course, like one solution is, of course, train and train yourself and educate yourself, of course, about safety measurements for your digital tools and your digital technologies. So like, where are the data stored, who's access to what, make sure that you're using strong passwords, stuff like that. I think you know all the drill. But this is something which is a big problem and a big challenge moving forward with these kinds of things. And we're just talking right now about a very simple platform, like I'm just like what we're having right now. It's like I'm giving a talk right now. If you say what we will discover later on is, of course, like more data, which is revealing even more information where other people are involved, like Bluetooth data, for example, or Wi-Fi data, these becomes even more sensitive. So, but the big question, of course, is who is in charge of that? Leading to the last part, of course, is laws and regulations for telemedicine. Now, it is quite challenging right now from a regulatory platform, from a regulatory perspective, which platform should be used, which requirements are there, and how do we ensure that they are met? Because of course, how there are a lot of requirements, and there are a lot of different needs for different patients and for different mental health problems. But how can I make sure that these requirements, A, are met, B, are in a safe space, and C, are not exploited? And so this is a very long-term discussion which is happening around the world. How do you make the World Wide Web in general more safe, and then in particular, of course, how do you make sure that these kinds of confidential information stay confidential? Because there's, of course, the old saying, what happened in the what's is pushed into the internet stays in the internet. So it is a quite big challenge to approach these kind of things. Now we opening up a little bit in the second chapter, where we say, okay, now we have face-to-face communication, where I say, oh, I have a mental health expert, like I have already the information that I need, I'm in need. But now what the question is right now, what if I'm as a user have no idea where I can find help, or if I'm not sure what is wrong with me, or like if I want to learn something about this? And there was a very interesting article from the New York Times last year about the question of how do you access information online? Now, when I grew up, when I was a teenager, the internet just started. So, like, I remember the old modem with the old wonderful sounds when you have these kinds of connections, and the start of Yahoo and Google. So basically the start of search engines. And the revolution, how easy it became to find information through these platforms, and just one question and you have your answer. But in that times, and if you look into the in the early times of the World Wide Web, it was all text-based, right? So all these informations were text. Later on, with social media, for example, the imagery became more pronounced. For example, with Instagram, where we basically post a lot of images. And lately, there's another trend towards TikTok, for example, where you have the presentation of videos. So the combination of, so like, for example, e-learning changed a lot and drastically. So when I started my undergrads in Regensburg at that time, we had a lot of text-based tutorials and materials where we had basically like read the textbooks, and that's it. But by the end of my degree, which is like 3 years, it was basically like everything is a video tutorial now. So we had a lot of video content telling us how to program, how to do an MVC, and so all these kinds of technological aspects. And the interesting aspect the New York Times is basically highlighting is the question around how do Gen Z and millennials are basically searching for information and searching for news and content and stuff like that. So what they saw in their analysis is basically that the Gen Z prefers to look up information on TikTok rather than on other more traditional searching platforms like Google, for example. And it's not surprising that you say, that you have the social exposure on TikTok. So basically, you have the connection to your friends, you have the recommendation algorithms. It's like you have these kinds of things in the background. So instead of saying, where can I go for a restaurant in London, for example, you can say, which of my favorite TikTokers has a recommendation for me? And I have immediately the information like how this looks like, what is the food there, for example. Or as well, of course, the rise of influencing and the influencing marketings, where I basically have not the brand themselves speaking, but also, of course, an marketing influencer person, which is basically representing this brand and saying, this is my favorite one, etc., etc. It's like, and then, of course, Walters, da 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 da. So you have a shift towards a different perception of the World Wide Web growing right now, where it's basically shifting away from, there's a lot of text, there's a lot of different information, towards these kinds of silos of information content, like the social media platforms, for example, like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, you name them, or X or /Twitter, I don't know how you want to name it. But the interesting aspect here is basically, if you want to reach out and you want to communicate information, maybe we need to rethink about how to reach out to individuals who may be in need. And what happens like with big brands, of course, like they going now on TikTok, they are advertising on these platforms. And in comparison to other contents like mental health needs and informing about the development of mental illnesses or in general health issues is now basically pushed towards these individuals. And the question is, of course, like the quality of these things. So previous work explored how is TikTok, using TikTok now as an example, how is TikTok used in the context of mental health. And what they found is basically in 2 of these previous studies, of course, there's a high engagement with the content of the platform. So younger consumers are basically interested in engaging in TikTok much more in comparison to traditional platforms like a website or something like that. And in some parts of the world, social media platforms are the internet. So, for example, they are communicating only through Facebook, for example, and using these kinds of platforms in comparison to other usages, for example, in the Western world, where you have more these kinds of blogs and more diverse approaches. In other parts of the world, Facebook, for example, is the dominant platform to reach out to others and to have this whole communication platforms. And the interesting aspect here is, of course, because TikTok is perceived, was like in the early days, like these kinds of dance challenges and stuff like that. So it is quite hard for institutional accounts to fit in there. Like the language which is spoken on social media is different per platform. So for example, Facebook communication works differently than Instagram, and Instagram works differently than TikTok, for example. Like in Instagram, you have more like these kinds of visual representation, and then you have the link embedded in there. On Facebook, you still have the text-based stuff. And then on TikTok, you have the video content. But of course, you are competing against more engaging content, which is more entertaining, more fun, etc. But the high risk was like the big challenge. I don't want to be always like the negative person. The big challenge is working with social media, especially with TikTok, is of course the entity called the algorithm. The question is, how do people find your content on social media and on these platforms? Where you say, how easy is it to find you? And then therefore, of course, you need to create engagement, and then the algorithm is leveling you up, and therefore you're getting more exposure to stuff. So and how do you balance the need for, okay, this is professional mental health content versus this is an advertisement, this is these kind of things. And of course, there is the kind of risk of exploitation of these kind of things, of algorithms, and say, I want to push you towards, okay, this kind of content, these kinds of certain user, certain content. And therefore, I'm manipulating my content towards that it's causing certain emotions. So, for example, we have these kinds of questions, the exposure to negative emotions like anger and fear and anxieties like that. So, of course, this is such a hard-rooted or deep emotion that individuals are drawn towards these kinds of content. And some experiments which you can, if you are adventurous, you can try out a little game on social media. If you get a new phone and a new TikTok account, it is quite easy, or it is quite fast that the algorithm is showing you extreme content. So like pushing you into certain directions, because of course this extreme content on the other side is keeping you on the platform, and if you are staying engaged with the platform, then the platform is winning. So we have there, which is quite challenging in comparison to the telemedicine aspect. In the social media context, you are competing with different stakeholders. You have your user, which have the mental health need, but you have, of course, then this entity of the algorithm, which is basically like sorting out which content goes in there, which is then, of course, in the background by influenced or affected by the platform developer, which has their own needs and their own goals. And then you as a mental health expert standing in this kind of platform or on this platform saying, okay, how can we survive or like help people in need on these platforms? The last part, which is quite interesting, is, of course, given that TikTok and social media in general is a fast evolving construct, it is quite hard to find full out studies about the benefits and risks of particular platforms. But for example, like for TikTok right now, it's in development, and more and more people are researching about this. So it's a two-sided sword, which I will show you in a moment now. Because on one side, we have some thematic analysis basically focus basically on the preferences and the qualitative aspects of social media, reveal positive and negative aspects. So for example, individuals are saying, okay, positive themes which emerge in the interviews say, okay, this social media is helping them connecting with others. It's helping them to find information. It's exposure to positivity, the emotional support, and so self-expression and satisfying, so like, oh, I can pass time. But also, which is quite fascinating, is the social media helps individuals to cope with negative emotions, and this kind of downward social comparison, which is basically describing, oh, I have a mental health problem, but I'm not alone. So like I'm comparing myself to others and saying, oh yeah, this is fine. And there are many positive aspects of social media, which shows us, yes, using social media in the context of mental health can actually be a positive experience for them to say, oh, we can use, for example, to say, oh, you find your friends, you can easily connect with them. So like you have this kind of easy connections. So for example, if you compare how difficult it was to have international friendships and how easy it is now to connect with others like around the world, like it is a really, really powerful tool to maintain social relationships. And of course, again, like I can be part or I can participate in the life of others. Like, oh, they are sharing content, they are sharing their life experiences and stuff like that, so like through the social media, which is then, of course, giving me a positive exposure. But of course, also users of social media are quite aware of potential negative risks of social media, because social media, we have this big discussions around the influence of social media on information competence and the big buzzword fake news, for example, because of course you have social media makes it easier to spread information, misinformation, to say, oh, I can just write something on my blog, on my post, on my Instagram. So like nobody is checking fake checking that, or for a long time not checking it. Nowadays, social media platforms are enforced, or is like getting more and more pushed towards that they have to maintain and sense check what people are posting on their platforms. And of course, you have these kinds of questions around like, does social media form bubbles and say, oh, I am in an echo chamber, basically always hearing my own opinion, which is a quite interesting and quite challenging question, because if you compare social media to your physical world relationships, it is actually quite the opposite. So in the physical world, you have more your friends which are more aligning with your thoughts, with your hobbies and stuff like that. So like automatically you have a similar experience and therefore a more positive time, versus on social media you have anybody mostly can, also like a lot of people can reach out to you and can say, oh, your content is, or your opinion or your thoughts are not valid. So you have actually quite the opposite, where you have like these big marketplaces online in comparison to these small bubbles which you have like in the physical space. And if you compare this development or this trend to the earlier times in the social media game, where basically small communities, small focused communities had their own small bubbles, it was quite easier to navigate like in which content I want to follow and which content I want to experience, which is so changing right now, because of course, like from the multi-diverse small communities, you have these big chunks of, or big communities evolving, which is like, okay, all these people on Instagram, all these people on TikTok, all these people on social media can reach out to me. And of course, there's this like a back and forth, like how can we manage this? And so, of course, the negative aspect which I want to highlight is the fear of missing out. The fear of missing out is, of course, this kind of that people are worrying, oh, people having fun, but I'm not part of it. Oh, I'm missing out this cool party. Oh, I can't do this and this and this. And so like my question, which I did an experiment this summer with some students, was basically looking into if digital platforms like games can basically trigger this kind of fear of missing out artificially. So for example, if advertisers can say, oh, you're missing out this kind of magical, cool equipment stuff, so you should show up. And what they figured out, or what we found, is basically that the strongest aspect is, of course, the social aspects in games, where you can say, oh, if I'm missing out to interact with my friends, is always the strongest factor to leading to fear of missing out. But also artificial, I can also introduce artificially fear of missing out and saying, oh, this is a limited offer, da 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 da. And so exploiting these kinds of mental health issues is something which is highly concerning, because of course social media platforms or general digital technologies can feed on that and say, oh, of this fear, and saying, oh, you're missing out, you maybe should buy something fast now. And so like we have these discussions not only in the digital space, but like in general, it's like playing around and exploiting the mental health aspects of users. But of course, we have prior work which is also highlighting that the usage and the overuse of social media can link to the decline of mental health. And another experiment which you can do also at home is basically looking around the question of toxic positivity. For example, the focus or the enforced happiness online. So what I did here is basically I looked into content where we looked into which hashtags were used. So like basically my content, I can give them a hashtag, and then if I search for the hashtag, then I see the content. And I looked for two emotions. I looked into happy and I looked into sad. I did this experiment May this year. And as you can see, there is a huge bias towards the happy content. It's like enforced content to say, oh, happiness is everywhere. But as we all know, that the life is not always happy. It's like we have also negative emotions, like how do we cope with them? And so what we see is basically on one side, people are, what we saw before, that there's like this theme around social media saying, yes, social media can help me to cope with my negative emotions, and social media is helping me to recover from negative emotions. But on the other side, you have like, where's space for negative emotions? Where's space for grief and stuff like that? And people with certain mental health problems, for example, like depression or anxieties, are basically then it's like, oh, I've basically pushed towards this emotions like, oh, maybe something is extremely wrong with me because I feel sad, and therefore it's like, of course, can have the risk of starting a vicious cycle of saying reinforced negative emotions and saying, oh, something is wrong with me because I'm sad, but I have to be happy. And this is not only for positivity and emotions, which we see later on, which is also happening with physical attractiveness. So on the other side, we have the big discussions around the behavior online. So like quantitative data, so like what are people doing? It's like, what are the effects of behavior online? Because on one side, what previous work found out is basically there's a association between a high number of usages of social media platforms and levels of depression. So this means that people are basically withdrawing and trying to satisfy their social needs through many diverse social media platforms, ranging from online dating platforms up to Instagram and TikTok. And then, of course, as you saw before, then they get reinforced with these kind of biased expectations of, okay, you have to be happy, and happiness is everywhere, and you are the one who is failing on that. So, which is then, of course, putting even more pressure on them and even more emphasizing and even more stressing out the mental health problems. And then, of course, the next step or the next problem is what previous work identified. More social media usage was linked to a greater odds of having an anxiety disorder. So, as we mentioned before, the fear of missing out, that I'm, of course, if I have already this basic arousal, okay, I'm worried, I have this elevated level of fear, okay, maybe I could miss something out. And this could spiral into the development of anxiety disorders around saying, okay, I'm missing out, or like how people thinking about me. So like these kinds of social stress and social anxiety. And quite interestingly, which is the last point, is of course the perception of beauty and the beauty standards. If you follow the news, or I think it's around the world phenomenon, that people start to take surgery or wanted to have plastic surgeries building on filters, of augmented reality filters. So augmented reality filters basically describe, I take a picture of myself, and then the camera, where I can manipulate my face and make it beautiful. So for example, as you can see, so like my age is already showing up. So like I have some gray hairs in my beard, or like I have some wrinkles in my on my eyes. But the interesting aspect is, of course, I can use a filter and I can use computer vision to blur them away. So I look younger, or I can give myself a different bone structure of my face, like I have this kind of baby face, and so on and so forth. So what started in the late 2010-ish, with Snapchats, like having these kind of filters, I can put cute dog faces on me, spiraled quickly into, this is a beautiful face, or this is how you look into the when you're 70 or 80, etc., etc. And this basically fed then into the problem that people started to demand that they want to look in the real world just like their filtered image. Now, the problem, of course, with these filtered images is that they are unrealistic. And so basically, they're trying to follow a beauty standard, which is not hard to achieve. And of course, that basically affects their perception of their body and their body satisfaction, and therefore starting the development of body dysmorphia and stuff, and problems around their own body perception, leading to eating disorders and stuff like that. So these kinds of problems were basically the exploitation of the beauty standards and the wishes to the desire to be attractive can lead to severe mental health problems, and saying, this is not what you, so like this biased perception of what your body will look like with this weight and stuff like that. So what we did, for example, we did an experiment with participants with an eating disorder and used these kinds of filters and asked them to rate how much their weight, it's like manipulate their vision perception and say, okay, this is your how you want to look like, and this is actually the weight you think this will, it's like the actual weight of your idealized body. It's like basically the positive aspects of these kinds of what we learned from social media is that we can use these kinds of filtering to create awareness about the potential problems they are encountering. Long story short, what is the role of the counselor in the age of social media? And so, like, what can we do here? On one side, I think the literature emphasizes that we as mental health professionals need to create awareness about the benefits and harms of potential online engagement. So the problem is, of course, as you saw in the earlier part of the talk, is we can't keep people away from digital technologies. They are there, they are surrounded with them. And it is an important part of their life and for their future to be to have the digital literacy so that they understand how they can engage with technology. So I think the first step, what we need to look into is how can we create awareness and how can we help individuals to become aware of the benefits and the harms. And I think the important point is not only about blaming and saying, oh, technology is bad and social media is bad and it's like it's all about you, all about the technologies. No, it's a back and forth, but so not always what is happening right now in the public health discussions, like, oh, it's in the user's hands. No, it's basically like an in-between. It's like the negotiation between the user and the provider and saying, okay, we need to say, create awarenesses about, okay, you are engaging a lot with this kind of content. Maybe you want to reach out to a mental health professionals, like from the platform side, versus that users are also learning about how they can use this for their benefit. So for example, that they can use social media and saying, hey, I challenged myself and documenting their progress and encouraging others and like finding their communities and stuff like that. Another point is, which I think is quite interesting, which we touched a little bit about this, the engagement with social media itself could be an interesting measurement and saying, okay, asking patients, asking participants who are showing up in the clinic, how much they engage with social media. It's like, is there a link towards a problematic usage of social media? Are they too much committed to social media? It's like, are they only communicating through social media? So this could be an interesting part of quite interesting usage of online behavioral data, was like as an assessment platform and seeing, okay, are you healthy? Do you understand how you use social media? What social media means to you? And of course, the last part is playing a little bit the signpost, or so like starting to become a signpost about how technology is used and the potentials of usage and about the manipulation online. So we talked a lot about this kind of things of eating disorders and stuff like that. So like the distorted perception of oneself caused by Snapchat filters, the presentation of their own body, the presentation of their own thoughts and stuff like that. So it is important to help individuals to raise awareness about these and educate them about this, to say, be careful about who is online and what is the goal of the platform, and why are you engaging with this platform. So what is your goal with this platform, and what are the goals of the platform developers, for example? So how is the platform developers actually goal to help you with your mental health issues, or is the platform basically just there to lure you and keep you on the platform and engaged? So you have these kinds of things, and so like raising awareness about these challenges in the design. Now, a big topic is, of course, for us in the realm of technology, is the role of artificial intelligence. So in recent years, like, of course, you have ChatGPT, you have DALL-E, you have Bard, you have all these wonderful and really, really cool artificial intelligence and powerful technologies. But how can we use them in mental health? And previous work already outlines that individuals start using artificial intelligence chatbots to ask about mental health interventions. Now, the problem with this kind of these mental health interventions is that here as well, just like social media, you have biased data and limited efficacy to say, oh, I have this kind of mental health issues, and then the artificial intelligence is basically shifting towards, oh yeah, maybe you have a mental health issue, you should talk to an expert. And so, is this enough? And then, of course, on the other side, there's always the risk of errors. So, for example, right now, it was like a couple of weeks ago, this was a big concern for a lot of AI developers. ChatGPT started to give even more sloppy answers. So instead of being clear about their results, they started the results of the chatbot were like very vague, very sloppy. And then overall, you have, of course, the risk of that artificial intelligence is making up information. So these tools, in comparison to search engines, are basically just have calculating the probability that a sentence is structured in a certain sense. So, for example, if I'm asking about social anxiety, then the probability is high that a sentence, if the answer sentence will contain something about, oh, meeting strangers will cause you anxiety, or like engaging with us, or exposure therapy. So you have these kinds of statistically constructed sentences, but these sentences, let's say 80% of the time, contain information, but do they contain the correct important information which is required for them, for individuals to take to help them with their mental health issues? So you have on one side, of course, the big benefit and the big powerful, really powerful tool to say, oh, I can do a pre-screening with them and say, okay, you can reach out to somebody 24/7 and saying, oh, I have this problem. And we're developing right now interventions based on AI chatbots, where we're basically using it's called Future Me, where we basically are interested in helping people to regain their thoughts or regain their capabilities to think about the future. So like in comparison to individuals with depressive symptoms, there's of course the rumination more about the past and like this kind of thing. And so like they find it quite challenging to think about the next steps. And the idea is what we are exploring right now, which is right now not a development. So is that we can think about, okay, what if I'm talking to myself from the future, enacted by the AI? So I'm talking with myself and basically applying validated prospection approaches covered in this background story. And the first trial was quite positive, so like the acceptance of these things, but the next steps are required. But overall, we are facing again, to sum up artificial intelligence, where are we right now? I think it's like there are great, powerful ways how we can employ this, like in the pipeline of mental health assessments and intervention design. But of course, you are facing the quality of the answers could be quite challenging, and saying, "Oh, is this actually what users need right now in their situation?" A. B, you have the false information which can be spilled out by the artificial intelligence, and you will always have this kind of risk using these kinds of platforms. C, the question again is ethical concerns about the role of the mental health expert. So if I'm, as a mental health expert, encouraging you to say, go out and use these kinds of chatbots, and the chatbot is basically suggesting you something wrong, which is worsening your mental health, who is reliable for this? Is it the AI? Is it the AI developer? Or is it me, the mental health expert, who encouraged you to go to these kind of platforms? Because as a mental health expert, I can't do anything right now if the AI is basically like, I can't manipulate this and say, okay, this is what you have to say in these situations. But right now, of course, trend and the interest for a lot of developments is right now these kinds of chatbots, and customized chatbots, where individuals can reach out to and say, oh, I have these kinds of problems. And then it's a mixture between the large language models like ChatGPT and a more rigorous decision tree where I can say, oh, I have these and these problems, and therefore maybe you are in this category. And so like you have a pre-diagnosis. So as you can see in these examples with technology, it's like you have a powerful tool in your hand, with these techniques, but on the other side, be aware of potential flaws and potential shortcomings of the technology. Before we move forward, I would say, because I talked now for an hour now, I think it's a little bit time to refresh, and let's take a break for 5 minutes. And then we're going into the mobile health apps and the usage of these apps in the context of mental health.
Okay, we will have a 5 minutes break, and we'll be back after 5 minutes. So Martin, thank you.
And if you have any questions in the meantime, I'm here if you want to already chat with me about that, what you heard so far.
Okay, see you.
Hey, Martin. Great talk.
Hello. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, great. Yeah, go to grade some beverage for yourself.
Yeah, wait. I still have here my wait. Let me.
You still have your Coke?
Yeah. Of course. So how have you been?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm great. So yeah, so it's Friday morning, right? So are you in the Euclid office?
Yes.
Yeah, I could tell the roof. I could tell the roof from that's Euclid's office.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Amit is not around.
No, Amit is it's like my colleague who is doing digital health for everybody else. Like he is right now in Germany, so like he's celebrating at home. But I have to write my grant. So I'm still.
Yeah. So this Christmas you will stay in London?
Yes, I'm exploring the wonderful UK time. Let's see how Christmas will look like in the UK.
Yeah, have you been in UK in Christmas time?
No, that's the first time for me.
Wow, that will be great. I think London will be beautiful right now. So yeah.
Yeah, the other ones already is like it's like right now the situation in London is basically like you see that a lot of people are already going home, and it's like it's becoming quite.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have more space on the tubes now.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. But is there cancel a lot of service during the Christmas time, or still run a lot?
Yeah, some students are around. So like some of my students, it's like 2 of them are right now building their games for assessing trust in artificial intelligence. So like how do you have to design these kinds of interfaces, and the other one is fixing their games about the cosmetics in games. So where they basically they have an infinite runner game, and then basically we are measuring if social anxious individuals are drawn towards this cosmetics. It's like what a lot of game companies are pushing players towards, so that they have to to buy these outfits for their avatars and stuff like that. And so like the question for me is if the social pressure is transported to people with social anxiety, A, and B, whether it's affecting their consumer behavior.
Consumer behavior.
Yeah, that's quite
behavior. Buying some tools, buying some gifts in the game, right?
Exactly. So I think it's even bigger in Eastern countries. With these kinds of, you have one big game and then you feed everything into the character, versus in Western worlds where they have a lot of different games. And so like these kinds of how the self-representation is important in these spaces. So yeah, we're going into the games world soon.
That's good. Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, that's the. Yeah, so how is your ABC about other people? Is everyone? So now the semester already finished, right? Oh,
Yeah.
still yeah, we still have one.
Yeah.
We still have 1 week to go.
Yeah, for us, it's right now. It's like last day.
That's
At
good.
At 5,
You know,
UCI kicked us out.
my last day is the 26th of December, just the day after the Christmas. So in Taiwan, students already has their Christmas party. They will have the party a bit earlier because the final exam presentation all happen in the Christmas week. So then they make everything a bit earlier.
Yeah. Our students had their presentation on last Friday, and we invited also Meta over. So they were like a little bit starstruck. Oh, there's somebody from Meta reviewing us. And so, yeah, here.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I have students working in Meta as well.
Nice. Which product is she which product are they working on?
I think she is in the advertisement team. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I heard a lot from her that because they lay off a lot of people, but because of the advertisement team, she do the user experience in advertising team, and there is earning money team, so then they are safe. But
yeah, oh my god.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
this
right now,
it might create a lot of anxiety for the employee right now as well.
All right. Should we resume, or
okay, we have 5 minutes, so we can start.
all right?
Or do you need more time to break?
I'm ready.
More coffee?
Yeah, it's still there.
Okay, we will our second round. Okay, thank you.
All right, welcome everybody back. I hope you have enough beverages and coffee. So for the second half, because now it's becoming more hands-on. So like in the previous stuff, we were talking all about like the digital behavior online and stuff like that. But these things, our phones, we have a lot of potential in there and a lot of sensory data in there. And let's explore these things. How can we use them in the context of mental health? So here I used right now is like the overview of the latest iPhone and what sensors are built in there. And so on one side, of course, you have like the location sensors where you have like the GPS, all these kinds of different GPS tracking devices. Then you have the Bluetooth connection and the Wi-Fi. You may maybe ask yourself, why did I put Wi-Fi and Bluetooth into location? Well, a lot of these kinds of COVID tracking apps basically use the Bluetooth connection and the Wi-Fi signal to identify how close you are to certain other devices in your surroundings. So basically, I can use these signals, as like the combination of GPS, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth to basically get an information out of you where you are, with whom you are right now, and how close you're standing with each other. So like, are you close to a Wi-Fi sensor, or are you further away? Are you in a group? So like, there are a lot of Bluetooth connections, potential Bluetooth devices around you, or are you standing alone? Then the next stuff is sensor data. So like sensors in the sense that I can get more information about where, how you move around and the surroundings of your world. So I can use, for example, the accelerometer and the gyroscope to say, okay, I can predict if you are biking, if you're walking, or if you're sitting still, or if you sleeping, for example. So, for example, these kinds of things, what some sleeping apps are basically asking you to do. I have to put my phone on my bed, and then basically this is basically tracking, okay, how much do I move in bed by just measuring, okay, how much do I move my phone by proximity. Is like, okay, if I'm turning in the bed, then I'm also, of course, shifting around the mattresses and therefore moving around. But this is also interesting that I can also have light sensors, and in some sensors, there's also in some devices built in a pulse measurement. So like, for example, in some devices, I can put my finger on the back and then use the camera and the pulse tracking to say, okay, how much pulse of my pulse track. And then I mentioned it before, of course, I have for a lot of cameras, like right now I have a Pixel 7 here. And with this, I can do a lot of vision processing. And most of these have not only back-siding cameras, but also front-siding cameras. And I want to give you a short example where people basically predicted the PHQ-9 depression score based on the sleep data, which were measured through the behavior, the movement data, the interaction data. Basically, it's like, okay, how much did I call somebody? How close were I standing with somebody? With the Bluetooth data, and the movement data, so like with the GPS. And this is quite interesting because you can see, going back to Marshall McLuhan, media as extension of man. Here you see this, like our phone can tell a lot about ourselves. And just a very simple, like I have just 4 data points, like a couple of data points, which I just have from one simple device. So like I don't need any additional wearable already to say, oh, I can detect these kinds of mental health stresses and predict a PHQ score. And it is, of course, a very, very powerful tool and a very powerful aspect. And so like the correlations building between the measurement tools like PHQ-9, PHQ-4 and PHQ's and anxiety measurements and stuff like that is something which has been explored hugely in the context of human-computer interaction. So where we say, okay, is there a correlation between movement data, Bluetooth data, behavioral data, and a measurements tool. But then on the other side, the question is always, where are we right now? Is this blessing or is this a curse? So as before, it's quite challenging. Like on one side, of course, we can use this as mental health experts and saying, yes, we can use these kinds of data and saying, oh, we can assess your mental health. You don't have to come to a hospital. We don't have to give you special hardware. But then on the other side, the question is privacy. So there is a big problem that, for example, what previous researchers found out, that a lot of privacy issues through apps happening. So people are basically installing some mental health apps, and which is like advertised as the best one. And then basically these data are exploiting the behavioral data. And as you can see, these data are quite extremely sensitive. And if you have time and if you're interested in this kind of topic, go through your permissions, I think on both Android and iOS. You can see which informations your apps are accessing. And then, for example, you may ask yourself, why does a meditation app need to know my contacts? Like, why does this free app access my friends' data, or like these kinds of informations which are highly sensitive? And you see then that it's why some apps are free, because you're paying with data. And it is a quite challenging aspect to say, oh, yes, we can develop an app, we can develop these kind of things, but there's even more challenging usages, like on the side of, like, of course, the privacy aspects and the privacy concerns of this. But then there's, of course, the question of the design of applications. I don't know if you use Netflix or streaming, any streaming platforms, but for example, Netflix introduced the feature, "Are you still watching?" And "Are you still watching?" is like after a couple of hours, if you're not interacting with your device, like if you don't move your mouse or something like that, Netflix asks you, "Are you still there?" And if you're not there, then stops the stream. Now, this is on one side, of course, a positive idea to say, oh yeah, they're trying to minimize, create a sustainable environment, say, okay, you don't consume that much stream. But then on the other side is, of course, you're poking the attention and you're dragging away the attention from other people, from other tasks they're working on. And in the human-computer interaction space, the question is, of course, who is the user and which problem are you trying to solve? And I want to introduce you to the darker side of design, because, of course, in the overall goal of user-centered design processes, we want to focus on, okay, what are the needs of the users and how can we satisfy them with our design? But then maybe you have experienced some of them. So like the idea is basically like, oh, you are nudging your users into certain directions and saying, oh, you want them to do something what they didn't want to do in the first place. So for example, we have the nagging component where basically an app is forcing you or pushing your attention. It's like, oh, you have to do this, and pushing you, it's like draining your attention, saying I stop nagging until you do this. So for example, you have this when you have booking of flights, for example, or it's like getting pushed into buying certain things, or it's like these kind of things. Obstruction is also a commonly used phenomenon where you basically say, oh, I'm making it as hard as possible to stop a service or something like that. So you see this, for example, in cancellations. So for a long time, it was quite hard, for example, to quit certain contracts and stuff like that. And so these kinds of engineering techniques. And why I'm bringing this up, always keep the mental health hat right now on, because the question is, of course, who is more vulnerable to these kinds of dark patterns or deceptive patterns. Another aspect is sneaking. So if I'm not paying attention enough, then I'm buying stuff or buying services which I actually didn't want it because they were per default in my basket, and therefore I have to pay for them, although I didn't want to do this. Another interesting aspect is the interface interference. So basically, as a developer of an interface, I can manipulate and say, okay, I can put the highlight to something which I didn't want to read. So you see this, for example, these days on Google. If you search for something, it's like if you search for mental health, for example, you see a lot of advertisements, which is basically leading to products rather than services. And this is quite interesting and quite challenging, and saying, okay, people who are in need can be basically deceived into buying a product which doesn't help them, but they spend money or resources and time and wasting time, precious time for healing them or helping them with the mental health issues. And the last aspect, of course, is the forced action interference, where basically I'm putting my users on a rail and saying, oh, I'm pushing you towards, okay, you have to do this in that way and no other way. And taking away the autonomy and saying, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to do this. But so this interface is basically pushing myself towards that I am pushed towards doing certain things or certain activities what the system asked me to do. And why I'm bringing this up? Well, there's like prior work which is like emphasizing that there is an elevated risk for mental health individuals, for people with mental health issues, that they may fall for these kinds of deceptive patterns. And what we discussed in the context of digital games is that mental health is not only these kinds of, oh, I have an anxiety disorder or a social anxiety disorder, but in the context of technology, this is the focus of vulnerabilities. So people have their misunderstanding on the design perspective. When can we talk about vulnerabilities towards these deceptive patterns? And what we argued in prior work is that we need to consider not only trait vulnerabilities like mental health conditions, but also like situational vulnerabilities. For example, like I'm stressed or I am hungry or stuff like that, and therefore I'm falling for these things. And there are a lot of these kinds of deceptive patterns and problems when it comes to app development. And one other big issue is not only the design of the app itself to keep people, to lure people into doing certain designs or certain aspects of the behavior, but on the other side, of course, the problem is that we have attrition. And the problem is there are thousands of apps similar to social media right now. It's like there's a lot of content out there, and it's like I'm competing with different venues and different people in the market who want the attention of the users, and of course pushing into the marketing, pushing into the attention, dragging away the attention. So even if you're trying to capture the attention of the user with your app, the question is the app, or is a digital mobile app the right solution? Because it's basically taking a lot of user efforts and self-management from the user to say, oh, I'm opening the app, I'm using the app, I'm engaging with the app, etc., etc., etc. So developing digital mental health interventions, it's not only in your hand, but like maybe you want to consider other platforms like what we discussed before. Maybe it's an online intervention is better, or maybe public spaces could be an interesting aspect, like thinking about public displays and physical computing, where you basically integrate the mental health intervention into the environment, for example. And how can you combat that people lose their interest in their mental health intervention and mental health developments? And one often discussed intervention, or one often used argument, is the usage of playful interventions. Now, in the last part, or in the last minutes of the talk, I want to focus a little bit about the role of digital games and close the circle of my research, where it all began with games. How games are used, and how can we use games data and behavioral data in online platforms in the context of mental health. So like, yes, we're focusing right now in the next part only on games in general, but there's also, of course, the usage in virtual reality, for example. We can use similar stuff, for example, in the usage of sensor data, which we saw before, like approachable data, stuff like that. So like you have similar data from the physical world recorded from your phones and sensory data, also in the digital space, where you can say, oh, I have the control over the whole environment. So an interesting aspect which I want to introduce to you is, for example, a way to say how games portray mental health. And just like in videos and horror movies, we have, of course, like the trope of, okay, there's the asylum, and there were people who have mental health issues, etc., etc. But in the recent years, in the recent decades, games, there were more and more games showing up, which took mental health topics in a broader term, like anxieties, bipolar disorders and stuff like that, and portrayed them and gave players a way to experience them and to like raise awareness about these mental health issues. So, for example, when I'm taking Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice, it's a game where you basically play this Viking woman, Viking fighter, and she basically is portrayed, and they basically used the voices she's hearing as a game mechanic, and basically made players aware of this is what this mental disorder means, and this is how they perceive their environment, and played around with this thing. But also it helped to raise awareness about this mental health problem. And during the COVID times, which was quite interesting, we saw a huge skyrocketing success of digital games, because a lot of players used digital games to cope with anxieties and their worries about COVID and stuff like that. And for example, my supervisor, Regan Mandrick, encouraged and basically stated, yes, play video games. And why should we play video games? Well, it helps us to the whole escapism idea of games. Like, I can be somewhere else, I can focus on other ideas. And you have the idea of, okay, I can give my players and my users back the experience of control over their environment, also like control about something. So you have these kinds of things, how you can use games and in the context of mental health. But of course, games, just like any other technology, can have the pro side, but also the controversial side, which we will explore in a moment, ranging from misinformation up to gambling, up to problematic gaming behavior. So I want to give you some of my work for three projects where we worked on basically different aspects in the realm of context, in the context of social anxiety and the usage of games in the realm of social anxiety. On one side, of course, we have the relationship of between digital media and mental health, where we look into, okay, design aspects of the game. How does this affect the experience of social anxiety in the game? How can we use this to promote mental health? How can we assess social anxiety through in-game behavior, or like general mental health aspects? And how can we design mental health interventions? So in the first experiment, what we did is basically we used, it was in 2021, in 2020, it was in 2020, late 2020. And in Canada, in this time, we had a shortage of toilet paper. And in this game, what we developed was basically an online game where they had to buy toilet paper. And what we did is basically we gamified the Trierer Stress test, which is basically like I'm exposed to the scrutiny of others and I have to perform in front of others. And basically we asked them to buy toilet paper in a game. So like they had to select the toilet paper, go to the clerk, check it out. And then the clerk saying, oh, you're buying a lot of toilet paper. How much does this cost? And then they had to do a short math riddle. And then in the background, two neutral people were paying attention in the moments, like avatars. And then they judged them negatively whenever they entered the price. The interesting question what we ask ourselves is, okay, we know from prior work that people with social anxiety experience social anxiety, and basically aspects of social anxiety are manifesting in the game. So like in a study, in a qualitative qualitative survey, we ask players of MMORPGs what they do in social in games and when they have social anxiety. And what turned out there was basically that social anxiety led towards similar behavior from the physical world in the digital world, meaning that people with social anxiety tend to disengage with highly challenging interactions. They try to stay at low challenging aspects, and they withdraw from social activities in these highly social games. Like, for example, World of Warcraft, these whole games are built around that I want to interact with others in the digital space, but people with elevated social anxiety didn't do this. So we ask ourselves, which aspect of the game can trigger or can increase the experience of social anxiety? And we focus on self-representation or avatar customization. So in this experiment, which I mentioned before, the toilet paper game, they had to either buy this as themselves, like with a customized avatar, or they had to choose an avatar. And then we asked them to rate expected and experienced fear. And then we basically compared, okay, how much, and built a linear regression model and looked into how expected and experienced fear are mapped out. And what we can see here in this graph is basically you see that people with customized avatars have a higher experience in expected and experienced fear in comparison to the predefined avatars. So what we see is basically whenever they have the chance to reveal more about themselves, which is quite interesting, they may experience actually more social experienced fear in comparison to predefined avatars. Meaning that basically if we push them towards enacting themselves in the games, of course, their anxiety is coming with them into the digital realm. In comparison to what prior work suggested, that socially anxious individuals escape from social anxiety. So maybe they have the motivation to play games to escape their social anxiety, but actually the social anxiety stays with them in the game. Another study which we basically compared stress reduce was in this pre-study was basically the stress reducing effects of video games. And what they basically did is like they had a meditation app and a video game app. And what we have here is like with the perceived stress and the heart rate, etc. People with elevated stress basically indicated that they have a reduction of perceived stress through video games in comparison to meditation. But as you can see, meditation still had a lower effect, a much lowering effect than video games. So you have, of course, the question about how do you design your games? Like this game was basically like, was it an action game or was it a meditation game? Like tranquil basis games and a high pace versus low pace game. And we're running right now a study where we ask participants to either engage with a news magazine or play a virtual reality game to compare the attention restoration of video games in virtual reality. And the results so far indicating that virtual reality is a stronger, more efficient way and restores more of the attention in comparison to reading a magazine. So the question is here, of course, like how can you help workers, for example, to restore their attention at a break, for example. So maybe it's helpful to play a virtual reality game or to have a virtual reality exposure in comparison to just reading a magazine. The third study I want to briefly discuss is one of my major research projects was basically the question, can we assess social anxiety through behaviors in-game? What we did in this experiment is basically we developed our own custom game and we asked participants to play the game. And what we measured was basically how they moved around in the game, where they moved around, and how close they went to a non-playable character, an NPC. And then the NPC was either friendly to them or they was aggressive to them. And then we also had the manipulation of if they was themselves and if they have a third-person cameras, like if they saw themselves or if they saw themselves only through a mirror. And the interesting aspect, what we saw in this study, we had a linear relation. We found that people with elevated social anxiety also showed similar behavior in the physical world as in the digital world, meaning that they tried to stay further away from strangers, tried to walk further around the stranger, and even made more mistakes just to stay further away from the stranger. So we see that we can use digital data and digital behavior as a way to assess social anxiety through in-game behavior. And it's just a scratch on the surface. Like we just use simple behavior data in there. You have a rich pool of data in-game and the behavior within games where you can assess and build relationships and correlations between mental health aspects and the behavioral data. The last aspect and last experience where we looked into can we use games and games related phenomena like video game streaming. Basically, somebody is streaming and I'm watching it on a YouTube or video stream. Can we use this as an exposure therapy? And what we saw in this experiment, yes, people with elevated social anxiety already show similar concerns and similar. It's like we found a lot of parallels in the traditional exposure task and the streaming task, and basically saying, okay, how can we match the needs from an exposure for a successful exposure task in the realm of streaming? Now, again, if you have a streaming task, it's like I can manipulate this and say, okay, I can fake an audience or I can play around with these kinds of design decisions. But then again, of course, the question is all good with video games? Are video games the tool? Well, not really. On one side, of course, we have game designs from off-the-shelf games. Is in recent years came into controversies around, for example, the deceptive designs, what we discussed before with mobile apps, but also, of course, with the question around gambling. So, for example, prior work shows that, for example, people with psychological distress have a higher engagement with these kinds of loot boxes and stuff like that. So like loot boxes describes I pay real world money and then I get random content for the game. And so what they found last year is basically that there's a relationship between psychological distress and the elevated levels like purchasing these kinds of loot boxes. What I'm doing right now is like investigating deeper into these kinds of relationship between problematic gaming and the prevention of problematic gaming through these kinds of designs, and looking into how can design basically lower the risk for psychological distress. But another point is gambling in games. It's like we have also the risk, of course, of the development of problematic gaming behaviors and the usage of the abuse of games and digital technologies to cope with mental problems, which is basically just intensifying the problem rather than solving the problem. So games themselves, are they good? Are they bad? It's in between. So just like any technologies. But so I don't want to say any of the technologies is the holy grail. All of them have their advantages and disadvantages, and which is leading to my summary of the talk. We have a lot of mental health preventions, treatments, and care techniques developed over the last years and decades to help people with mental health needs. And of course, the next step is to intertwine them and to bring in technologies and the use of technologies in these spaces. And of course, we talked about this. And yes, technology can help us because it can increase the accessibility of technology, of mental health support systems. It can help us to create new intervention designs. Like we can say, oh, digital behavior data, sensory data, we have artificial intelligence, we have virtual reality, we have all these amazing technologies, and they show in previous studies that they have the potential to challenge and to improve and enhance our approaches for digital mental health interventions and assessments. The important point is of course the user acceptance. And yes, we see in prior studies that using games, using social media, using all these technologies has a high acceptance rate in users, especially all across all the demographics, not only for the younger generations, but especially also there, of course, making it easier to access mental health interventions, etc. But then on the other side, it's not all good. There's also the big challenge, of course. We have still the ongoing discussions and the lack of clinical validations and risk analysis. So what we talked about in the artificial intelligence, what we talked about in the telemedicine, for example, how do we make these things clinical validated? How can we validate this? What are the risks with this? Like we need to explore these kinds of work, and we need to conduct more research together, not only technologists and mental health experts, but also, of course, developers and designers of mental health products and clinical experts. Then we talk a lot about the increased privacy and confidentiality risks. So you saw that digital data, the key takeaway, of course, is like we have a lot of confidentiality problems with all the rich data we have online. So like all the behavioral data I have, all these things online, they reveal a lot about me. And how can we make sure that they are safely stored? And last but not least, of course, we have the legal questions like who is in charge and who is allowing these kinds of technologies. As I mentioned before, what are the key takeaway messages? Well, first of all, create awareness about the benefits and the harms that may come with technology. So don't be scared of the technology, explore them, use them, but show also what are the benefits, but also look into what are the potential risks of that. Look into how can you use online behavior within the assessment technologies, like which sensors could I use, which aspect of the data could be interested for my mental health focus, or for example, for the user group I'm investigating. For example, people with like younger generations maybe are more leaning towards social media and TikTok, versus elder are more like, for example, on traditional mental health interventions, for example. And then stay curious about the usage of technology and the benefits and potential. So there's a lot of resources out there. Try it out, play around with these. That's what's the big fun with technology is. Like on one side, of course, it's a little bit scary, but on the other side, you can be the signposts for people who are curious about your about mental health and technology, and saying, okay, this is quite interesting. And there are a lot of people out there in the technology space who are eager to work with you as mental health experts, and they're excited to work with you. So yeah, stay curious about the technology. Last but not least, we had the question before: technology, curse or blessing? Well, it depends how you apply this and how in which space we are working in. And that is the end of my talk. I'm here now for questions, and thank you very much. I hope you have learned something and you had a pleasant time.
And thanks for Martin's wonderful talk and the presentation. So we have 10 minutes. If anyone can have some question, can ask our presenter, Martin, or you can speak in Chinese or Mandarin. Maybe okay. You can type the text in the column. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Martin. Thank you for your speech. And I'm actually Professor Ren Qi's master student, and I really enjoy your talk, especially how you organize and design all the information in very elegant fashion. Thank you for that. And I have two questions about our talk. First is I'm curious to know what's the definition of the game here? Like, what do you think is the most critical elements for a game? Is it a reward system or is it a role play, as I have seen in your study? I want to know about that. And my second question is, you have warned us about some concerns of AI application for mental health, like the privacy issues or some liability or misinformation. And I just want to know your opinion from your expertise or your experience. What would be the potential, like the good side of AI? What do you think AI can do better in helping this mental health digital intervention design? That is my questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for these very cool questions. So these already would spark another talk, 2 other talks, 1 for hours. So I try to keep myself a little bit short. Let's start maybe with artificial intelligence, because I think that's a broad one. I think artificial intelligence, it is a very, very powerful tool in the first line to say, okay, you can access, like you put a chatbot online and say, okay, I can interact with this chatbot, and this chatbot can direct me either to, okay, help me to identify if I have a mental health issue. But the important point is you need to have, when developing these kinds of chatbots, you need to have the mental health expertise and the mental health expert next to it, because otherwise you risk that, for example, you don't you oversee, for example, a symptom or stuff like that. So I think using artificial intelligence as a way within the assessment, I think is a quite powerful tool, A, and B, of course, like the data processing. So we talked a lot about chatbots these days with artificial intelligence, but it's actually a lot more where you can say, okay, feature extractions, like the behavioral data and stuff like that. So what I did or what we did, because of course, all my work is always with amazing colleagues, we just had a very simple model, but if you have, for example, go 1 level deeper, have more rich data, I think applying AI-enhanced models to these things, building models out of these data, is a quite powerful tool for assessing, contributing measurement tools, which is why what excites me is to say, okay, how can we use digital behavioral data and digital biomarkers, building on the data which is available on. That's part AI question. I hope this answered the question for the AI part. And the second part about games. what I think is the most important definition for games is you have, of course, the idea about the magic circle. So I'm allowing myself freedomly to go into the magic circle. I don't have any resources into that one, and I have the freedom to exit. So the thing is about digital games, for example, is it is always quite challenging when you enforce a game on somebody. So I don't know if you tried it, try to force somebody to play a game and ask them, do you have fun? Is this fun? You playing this game? It's cool, right? So then you see that actually they don't have fun and they don't enjoy the game. And so then is this a game or is this just a chore? And so I think this is an important aspect which comes to game development. It's like how you apply games. Like think about the freedom of the users, like that they can voluntarily engage with the game, that they can enjoy their time, but they can also voluntarily exit the game without being punished or something. And then, of course, then entering the discussion around gambling, for example, where people or game developers themselves throw in the need for physical resources, where you say, oh, you need to pay to enjoy the game. What is happening right now, where you have, you pay for the base game, but then you have to pay £10 or I don't know, much more dollars to get more content. So this is something where basically the line between gambling and gaming is weakening right now, which becomes a quite challenging aspect. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answers. Thank you.
Okay.
I think there's one question in the chat.
Another, yeah.
Leona Chen, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, asked, regarding the comparison of the stress-reducing effects between mediation and video games just mentioned. I'm curious about if it's comparing the same teenager while engaging in both mediation and video games simultaneously. What type of stress is defined there? Where does the stress come from? So for this study, so like what in this study I presented before, I think they had just measured stress for the individuals, like they didn't induce stress and they just measured like on a Likert scale as far as I remember. And I think they did it within design. So I linked the paper into the slides and I would share the slides with you after the talk so you can read it up. I have it not right now in my head because that's not my work, because it's basically an example, but it is an important point. I think I know why this question is rising. Of course, what kind of stress are we doing? Are we talking about social stress? Are we talking about this kind of performance stress? Like which aspect of stress are we talking and how is this mediated? And so, for example, was this also focusing on arousal and these kinds of things? So I think that is basically where this question aims for, if I understood it correctly.
Okay, is anyone have a question? Do I have a last one question? Because we have 3 minutes.
If you want to come to reach out and have any questions, like you have my email address, and reach out to that anytime.
Okay, Professor Chen.
Yeah.
Okay. I just think leave the question to other people, but I'm very interested in how could we design or how could we guarantee our designs more to make the technology more blessing and less curse. Is there any, because you are also a design expert, and then will we do this in the design process or will we do more user study or something too?
That's a very, very good question. So, like, how do we how do we approach the design? And I think there is, you have in the design space, like a lot in the training, you have like the human-centered design process, where you basically have a lot of experts come together and saying, okay, you have the user experience designer who's focusing on the design and say, okay, this is how the information architecture has looked. You have the programmers, and you have also in this context, basically, it's like more and more also mental health experts showing up. It's like giving their expert reviews. Like you have these kind of evaluations and it's like iterative process. But I think the next step, what needs to be done is like taking one step back, because giving the pure size of technology, I think only focusing on a user base might be quite challenging. You maybe want to expand to say, okay, we need to focus on a community-based assessment, a community-based design process, and saying, oh, how is our technology affecting our community? It's like you can scale it up more and more and more and saying, okay, does this technology or does this design affect is efficient for the user themselves, but also what is the impact of my design decisions overall to the technology. So for example, we have what I mentioned before is like we had all these kinds of up and downs with technologies. Like, yes, technology is powerful, but like some years later, you see, oh, it's getting abused. So like these kinds of back and forth, like how technology is used and abused. And so none of the technologies which we saw today or discussed today is neither good or bad for your mental health. So like it is depending on the use cases and who is using it in which scenarios. So like this is what I'm emphasizing. So like thinking about not only about the certain use case, but so like thinking about beyond and so like including the usage of the communities in a more co-design approach, like not only the user-centered design process as it's standardized, but also going beyond that. It's like including the community and focusing more on these kinds of effects going out of the technology. Does this answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that's, yeah, it's more than the user individual, also go beyond that to the community, because particularly mental health, a lot of time is within the community, not only individual issues as well. And then the game environment or online environment, the young people who are around, it actually is full of the other young people or even in the online community, and that probably the major resource that they cause their mental health issues as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so especially like with mental health, like you have of course like the social health in there, right? So like this sub branch where you have like this relationship and technology is basically affecting the social health on one level. It's like this kind of back and forth, like where these kind of intertwine. And it's like what a lot of technologists, so like also myself, for example, when I started to work on social anxiety, for me social anxiety was like, this is social anxiety, this. And then my clinical health experts were like, nah, it's actually there's this bubble, this is overlapping, this is overlapping, this is overlapping. It's like you have depression, anxiety, And it's like, for me as a technologist, this was right now, I was like, what? Yeah. I think we have another question.
Okay. The next question, the next question, hi, Wei Jia, right? Okay. Maybe. Okay, Professor Yang.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
I know it's late for you. It's your bedtime, maybe. So I just want to know, there are so many like the technology developed for mental health, and also so many research showing those are effective. But in the market, that you really rarely see them successfully being applied. So I would like to know your opinion. So what's the gap, and what is your view how to make them more really available and can survive in the market or in the service?
It's an interesting observation because on one side, for example, it depends on the complexity of the technology. So for example, let's start with virtual reality for now. Virtual reality was really hyped, or is still hyped, for the context of mental health. right? It's like, oh, you can do exposure, oh, you can do meditation apps. But actually, during COVID, we had a huge demand for mental health support and well-being support, and nobody bought these. So you have on one side like the financial and technological barriers. Like, why would I engage with an expensive technology? Because it's the results are not there. Also, like, for example, it's too complex to set up. So for example, in that time, setting up a VR headset, it is quite tricky and quite complex, like all the sensors and stuff like that. Then on the other side, you have the design of the application. So for example, it might be if you are on the phone, just check how many apps you have, how many notifications do you have. So, like, you have a lot of competition and competitors for the attention of the user on the phones or on the digital technologies, and therefore, of course, you need to design for that. And this is causing, of course, like the attrition, where basically people are saying, "Oh, it doesn't feel like I'm doing something for my mental health." Like the efficacy of the approaches is maybe not there yet. It's like where you say, "Oh, these mental health apps, for example, have like a very general approach, like, oh, you just do meditation app. And it's like, oh, you need to do a breathing exercise," which is basically like maybe it's helping in the long run, but like encouraging and motivating users to take these steps is quite challenging, which is mastered by games. Of course, they have like this kind of, oh, I want to be entertained. It's like, which is why I'm very interested and very curious about like how to connect entertainment and mental health beyond the gamification, and saying, oh, we don't, because a lot of these kinds of apps are basically right now maybe giving badges, maybe giving some scores and stuff like that, but these scores are meaningless. Like, how can you create a meaningful and mindful experience for users? And then you see that these applications are basically these ones who are trying to fit into the user needs and select the jobs to be done. Like, I think Mindspace is one quite popular, which is basically like trying to fit in like these kinds of mini exercises and stuff like that. So like these things are addressing the needs, I guess, better. And I think that's like where mental health and HCI developer, human computer interaction experts need to work closer together to bridge the gaps, like to design these needs, because we know the technology, but you know how or what needs to go in for the mental health patients.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think the motivational part is the key, very difficult.
For all the apps, not only for mental health, but like in general, it's like you have this in general, it's like with health tracking apps and stuff like that. It's like, how do you keep people engaged? And that's like and then you start the rolling off the balls, like, oh, we could do stealth assessment. So like we assess while you don't have to do anything, but then ethical concerns coming up. It's like, if I don't want to do this, how can I make sure that I'm not actually being tracked? How can I make it safe? And so you see these kinds of stepping stones go really, really fast. So like, and that's the big challenge, but I think also the big fun of working in digital mental health, where you basically have like so many stakeholders, and it's like bringing all of them together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this time is up, and we need to stop here, break here, and we also thank you for Martin's presentation. The talk is very wonderful. If anyone to have any question, you can follow the email to Martin. He will welcome our mail. And yeah, my personal, I have also some question, but I will I want to mail to Martin to my question. So let's thank you for Martin's, and we can give him a big warm clap. So
thank you very much. Oh, I love the emojis.
Yeah. So we can stop here and stop here. So see you. Maybe next time we can invite you again here.
Anytime, happy to come.
Thank you. Thank you. So
Yeah, next time, Martin, physically come to visit us.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's get the grants in.
Yeah. I will make this happen. I will do my best.
so
Awesome.
okay, we can so we have some question to complete, and we can see do we need to have some certificate screen or investigation?
照相的截图。
Oh yeah, we have we need to
We need to
photo.
take a group photo, and everyone open the camera and see the face, take a group photo. 照一个团体照，然后大家打开那个镜
屏
头。
幕一下，对，镜头打开一下。好了吗？都打开了吗？幸运可以吗？
好，来3、3, 2, 1. One more.
OK，
Okay, one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you.
OK, thank you everyone.
Thank you,
So-
Martin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martin.
OK, so we can. 所以我们就到这边。Thank you, Martin. So, we will. 就差不多嘛，到这边就可以了，对不对？
Yeah, Martin, have a great lunch.
Should I sign off or?
Yeah, it's all, and then yeah, you could go to have a great lunch. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a lovely evening and speak to you soon and see ya.
Yeah, and
See you.
yeah, good afternoon and have a good lunch. Okay, see
Thank
you
you.
next time.
Bye.
Yeah,
拜拜。
bye bye.
那也请其他这个伙伴帮我们就是填写那个满意度调查，就是这边应该有一个签推跟满意度的部分这样子。
那个曾老师，谢谢你帮我们邀请这个讲师。
不会，谢谢你们提供这样的机会，让大家来学
非常
习。
棒，我觉得非常棒，谢谢。
谢谢学长站台。不要，
不会，
时间很难过。
不会，就是台湾很愿意这样做，还蛮感动的，把这些国外的学者的一些新的研究跟发现，因为这一块很新啊，这一块真的很新 ，digital mental health。那我们也有一些研究在做，所以也希望可以跟大家来合作这样子。
好，有机会太好了。
欢迎。那也谢谢杨老师这个时间拨空来，就是全程参与这样子。
空话，谢谢，辛苦了。好，谢谢大家参与哦，那我就下线了哈，拜拜。
好，
拜
拜，
我也下线了，拜拜。
好，拜拜。如果大家都已经填完的话，就可以各自下线了。谢谢大家。那我也下线喽，心宇就麻烦你喽，
负责收场，拜拜。
拜拜。